Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is VBS Torah Study for a Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Feinstein, joined this cold, rainy morning by my dear friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Mark, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. You know how cold and rainy it is in LA, folks? It's so cold and rainy that the rain and the cold are here in Florida as well.
It came down to a frigid 71 degrees last night here in LA, and we all put our parkas on. We got an inch of rain, so we're all dancing. It's beautiful. Well, Mark, this morning we opened the Torah to Parshat Vayigash, which has got to be one of the most hopeful Torah portions of the entire year. In this Torah portion, Joseph, having now spent some weeks watching his brothers, testing them, putting them through the ordeal, he takes his youngest brother, Benjamin, and he holds him. And Judah, his counterpart, the one who cynically sold him into slavery 21 years earlier, stands up in front of him and says, "Take me instead." And he tells him the story. And now Joseph gets to hear his own story through the mouth of his brother. He never got to hear what happened at home. He always thought the family abandoned him, and it turns out they thought he was dead. And now he finds out how much Judah has changed, how much Judah cares about his father, how much his brothers have found a sense of solidarity. And he whips off the mask, steps down from the throne, and recites those words, Ani Yosef Achicha Od Avi Chai. I am Joseph, your brother. Is our father still alive? It's a moment of reconciliation. The whole of the book of Genesis is about brothers killing brothers, from Cain and Abel on down. And finally, brothers stand together. Hine matovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. How remarkable and wonderful it is when brothers can actually share the same world, can live together. So, Mark, what do you make of this? What does this?
Well, first, I want to ask you this question, because this is one of those questions that haven't gone away. Every year that I read the Parsha, new questions come up, but some questions stick, and I can't get rid of them. And one of the questions in Vayigash that I haven't been able to get rid of for 50 years is, why the hell didn't Joseph make any effort to contact Jacob when he had made it to be number 2 in Egypt?
Because Jacob was the one who sent him to his brothers. And Jacob was the one Joseph thought his father knew about the rivalry. His father must have known about the jealousy. So remember, his father, the last thing that happened 2 weeks ago, his father yelled at him for the dream that he had, where he saw the sun and the moon and the stars bowing to him.
Shall we bow down to you too?
After his father yelled at him, his father sent him to Dotan to find the brothers.
Okay.
So as Joseph is sitting in the pit, thinking he's going to die in the desert, he remembers that it was his father who sent him there. He thought his father was in on the plot. His father was in on it. And when Joseph gets fished out of the pit and taken down into Egypt, he hates all of them, his father and his brothers. And he asks himself the same question. My father's the richest guy in Canaan. Why isn't he coming to rescue me? Why is he letting me languish in this foreign land? And he must have come to the conclusion that Dad was in on it and wanted me dead too.
Okay.
When Judah stands in front of him and says, our father, we all thought our father, that our brother was killed by a beast. Because here's the story, right? The brothers put him in a pit. They sit down to eat lunch. The Midianites come and fish him out of the pit. When the brothers come to the pit, he ain't there. They really did think he was eaten by a beast. They don't know what happened to him.
Well, no, because it says they dipped his...
Yeah, they had to come up with an excuse because they put the kid in the pit.
If a beast ate him, there'd be blood in there. They wouldn't have to dip the...
All right, fair enough.
Okay, no, but I like where you're going.
That he thought his father was in on it. That's why.
Okay, That's it. That's an interesting.
He didn't know that his father was grieving for him for 21 years.
Okay, I think that's interesting. However,
Uh-oh.
I think there's another possibility. Since Ein Meshivin ala Darush, we don't ever resolve the debates of Midrash.
Go ahead.
Let's consider another possibility here. The first is, okay, so maybe he thought his father thought he was in on it, but at least even for revenge, even for stick it to your father, you'd send a message. You see what you thought you did to me? Well, guess what? I have power here, and I'm here in Egypt, so to hell with you.
No, but the hell with you part is right because he has two sons, right? His sons are Ephraim and Manasseh. The Ephraim is named for the phrase, I have prospered in my land of exile. And Manasseh means, you should excuse the expression, I forgot the bastards back home.
Yeah.
He hated them all. He couldn't stand he didn't want them anymore. They did this to him. They crushed him. He went through this ordeal. Look, Mark, a
Okay.
17-year-old kid sold into Egyptian slavery is
Yeah.
a
Okay, here's
fate
the other
worse
theory
than
that's
death.
fine. Okay, here's my other part of
He
that
got
theory.
lucky that he got sold to Potiphar. He got
Yeah, that
lucky,
was
or God was watching out for him,
God was
that he
watching
got
him. Sure.
sold to Potiphar. He got lucky that in the prison nobody touched him. You know, you don't want to send a pretty 17-year-old boy to a prison anywhere in the world, much
Right.
less in the whole of Egypt. But he went to the elite prison because that's
Yeah.
where he met the cupbearer,
Well,
right?
we know that God was watching over him because when he goes to Shechem to find his brothers,
There's the
they aren't
guy,
there.
the
So there's this man in the field
the man of Dotan, the most important
who
man in
asks
all of
him,
Jewish history,
Ma Tevakesh,
Ma Tivakesh,
what are you looking for?
which
And
is
then
the
of course
question.
he asked, have you seen my brothers? How would he know anyone was his brother? Yeah, he said, I saw your brothers. And they went to Dothan. So he goes to Dothan, which is where they grab him. And now, here's, I think, the reason why he couldn't communicate with Jacob.
Why?
If he sends a message to Jacob, then the story of the brothers is clearly a lie. And when they come back to tell Jacob a beast ate him, Jacob, of course, has a large part of his brain that's saying, stop with the lying. I know you killed your brother. So if he gets a message from Joseph, then he is certain that what the brothers told, what his sons told him was a lie.
Wow.
And so Joseph, to protect his brothers, because
Ooh,
deep in his heart, he wanted to be accepted by them, which
right,
is why he went to
right,
find them.
right.
He wanted to be accepted by his brothers, and to protect them, he couldn't contact his father.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
But whatever the reason, the interesting thing to me about the revelation is what it tells us about faith. That after he reveals that he's their brother, and he asks, is my father doing well? Or the translation Everett Fox offers was, I can't believe my father is still alive, which I think is a wonderful
Od
translation.
Avichai, right.
Od Avichai.
Wow, he's still alive, right.
Yeah, even with all this bad news. But the point is that at the end of that, after, of course, Jacob dies, and they bury him in the cave of Machpelah, and then the brothers are really nervous because, like the Godfather, he figures, okay, now all the revenge is going to come.
Well, you also remember Esau. Esau promised to kill Jacob as soon as Isaac was dead. So this is a family tradition. Wait till dad's gone, and then I'm getting back at you guys.
Yep. So when that happens, he says to his brothers, "V'atem hashavtem alai ra, Elohim hashavta l'tova." You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Now, to me, this is one of the most important theological beliefs of the Torah, which, as you and I know, you have to kind of dig out. Unlike Greek philosophy, which tells first principles and derivative principles, Judaism, and particularly the Torah, has beliefs, but they aren't stated in systematic ways. You have to kind of dig them out. And this is the belief that I hope our listeners will take. People mostly think that faith is believing a set of things, of beliefs, accepting them as true. I don't believe that's so. I believe that faith is accepting paradoxes, contradictions that you accept and hold in both hands, even though they contradict. Abraham and Isaac. Abraham believes, yes, through Ki b'Yitzchak yikareh lecha zera, God will give me a seed through Isaac, give me Isaac, and also kill Isaac, sacrifice him on a mountain. They both can't be true. If you kill him on a mountain, he can't be your seed. And yet he holds them both in his hand. And I think that what we have here is Joseph is saying, teaching another paradox. You just wanted to kill me. You wanted evil. But God is so powerful, so loving, so transformative to your life, if you let God in, that what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And I ask you, readers, listeners, learners, students of our podcast, of our teaching every Shabbos, I ask you, perhaps that's the secret message right now about the war in Gaza. I'm thinking there's nothing more evil than what we've seen. I mean, it defies any attempt to think of anything more brutal, more savage than the attack on the 7th. And yet, it is entirely possible, and if you want to say you're a Pollyanna, you're an optimist, you're a fool, there's no evidence for that, fine, I'm guilty. But let's suppose that this radical evil, which we accept has to be extirpated, could lead to a good. How could the 7th lead to a good? Well, it could lead to a good if the Palestinian people say, enough. Hamas has promised us things and they've never delivered anything but suffering for us. They promised us food and they took the food, the money for food, and they built tunnels to attack Israel. We don't want them anymore. I know all the polls say that the Palestinians support Hamas. I know all that. But I think intelligent, feeling, sensitive Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza could, as a result of this suffering that they are going through now, which is immense, they could say, this is the time for us to throw off Hamas, give back the hostages, and talk to Israel about a future that will include us both.
Oh my God, a man of faith.
I believe this. I believe this.
I believe that it's possible. I have to tell you though, and I say this is with some sadness, that I don't think that's realistic. I think that what happens in this cycle of nightmare is that the Palestinian people experiencing what's happening now, the war, the attempt to root out Hamas, are going to come back more radical than before. I wish you're right. I may be wrong. I hope that you're right, and I'm wrong. I hope that this does open a door to a new kind of understanding of the region and of the plight of the people. But I just every time that you've had these events, you end up with another wave of radical violence that follows.
It's true, but I offer as support for my hope,
Yeah.
not only faith, which is the ultimate reason for my belief in it, but I also offer the story of Germany after the Holocaust.
Okay.
By all accounts, from what is told to me by the people I know at Yad Vashem, the most effective and comprehensive Holocaust education curriculum in the world is taught in German schools.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, Ben Gurion accepted Mercedes taxi cabs from the Germans after reparations after the war, and he was criticized massively for it.
Right.
But it ushered in a period of rapprochement. And unless you are like my grandmother and others who wouldn't imagine that I would ever own a German car. I owned a VW Bug way back in the day, which was
Whoa.
the cheapest car that I could buy.
Yeah, but a
And
very
she
reliable
was
car.
so angry at me, you couldn't imagine. So
Right.
unless you believe that there's something wrong with Germans forever, and we should hate them forever, you have to see that there have been some changes here. Right now, with the rise of anti-Semitism, there's also been a rise that, of course, the media is not covering sufficiently, and that is the rise of sympathetic Christians who are standing with Israel, who I can tell you are sending me emails to my God Squad column every single day saying, we stand with you, we support Israel. People who are going to, diners where they put up, we stand with Israel, and they've been
Yeah.
boycotted, and they're
Yeah.
going to support those stories. The old 30-year-old story now of Billings, Montana, of Christians who put up Hanukkah menorahs in Billings, Montana, in their windows. And there is apparently a movement for Christians to put up menorahs this Hanukkah. So there is a rise of philo-Judaism, of Jewish love and support
Yeah.
from Christians that's also been provoked by this war. So my point is, faith is not the accepting of a single set of beliefs. Faith is the accepting of a paradox. And since Christmas is coming up, and I think we should say a word about the holiday of our Christian brothers and sisters, Christmas is really the ultimate paradox, because what is it affirming? It's affirming that a baby, a human baby, is born in Bethlehem. That's one belief. And the other belief is that that baby isn't a human baby, that it's God. And so that it's a baby and God. And then how do you work that out? That's the Trinity and all of that, which is way beyond my pay grade. And Tommy tried to teach it to me, and it was hilarious. I could. So let me.
No, I love this idea. I mean, the idea I think is very important.
The paradox.
Yeah, because look, we there is a tendency in human intellect to try to simplify things,
Yes.
bring it down to a simple one-note monotone. There's a tendency in when we meet moral circumstances to try to reduce them to simple black and white contests, call those Manichaean contests of good guys against bad guys, the white hats against the black hats, and and the problem with that is that reality never conforms to that, and that in fact, whereas in mathematics you can only have one proposition. It's either going to be X or not X. In basic logic says it's either X or not. The case is either X or not X. That's basic logic, mathematical logic. In the world of human beings, it's always X and not X. And that's your point. In the world of human beings, human realities, or what we call spiritual realities, are always the case and the other case, and both of them are true, right? I want my children to grow up to be independent. I want my children to always be connected to me. I am myself when I am in relationship. I am attached to my partner in relationship. Um, I am I form my own opinions and I bring my opinions to my society. My society forms cultural forms which inform my opinions. And this is always the way it is in human life. It's always paradoxical. So I really love your idea that the essence of faith is to keep two paradoxical, two opposite ideas in your head at the same time. Here is Joseph standing in front of his brothers, filled with the bitter memories of the day they threw him into a pit and sold him, or made it possible for him to get sold into slavery. Here he is carrying the memories of the years in the prison. Here he is carrying all that bitterness, and at the same time, he's figured it out. Joseph, who is the dream interpreter, and what it means to interpret dreams is to take these disparate symbols in a dream and figure out how they're tied together into a unified narrative, discovers the unifying narrative of his own life. And the unifying narrative of his own life is that he was sent to Egypt to save the world. He was sent to Egypt to save life. And now he understands that his brother's evil was actually turned out to be a blessing in the long run. And he can see that narrative. He can see that picture now. He can see that perspective now. So yeah, it's got the bitterness on the one hand and the perspective on the other. And then there's this one other thing in there, of course, which is he wants to have a relationship. As he sits on the throne of Egypt with that mask on, no one knows who he is. No one knows his name. No one knows his heart. His brothers know who he is, and he wants them. And so he resolves all these mixed impulses when he comes down and he says, I want to be your brother again. I want to be part of a family again. I think it's a beautiful thought, Mark. And that faith is exactly that. It's learning how to live with two opposite thoughts in your head at the same time. We Jewish people are committed to our own survival and our own thriving and our own protection. And we Jewish people are committed to tikkun olam, to the world outside.
That's the paradox
And
there.
if you leave either one of them behind, you violate the source of our vitality. My teacher, Harold Schulweis, used to have a wonderful metaphor for this. He said, think of truth as a pendulum swinging between the extremes. If you stop the pendulum at any point and say, this is truth, or this is truth, or that's truth, you don't have the full truth. The truth is the motion of the pendulum, which means that you're always going to be one side or the other moving in the opposite direction, right? If you say, I think the Jewish people has a deep obligation to itself, that's true, but it's also true that we have a deep obligation to the world. And if you say we have a deep obligation to the world, you always have to come back and say we have a deep obligation to ourselves. And that's the pendulum of that truth. And I think that's a beautiful way to think about faith.
I agree. And it isn't just a Jewish way of understanding that God is the source of the transformation of evil into good and is behind the dynamic. We have to make it real, but God is helping to make that paradox productive. The poet Barbara Crooker wrote, "For we are here not merely to bloom in the light, but rather like trees to be weathered, burned by heat, frozen by snow. And though our hearts have been broken, still we put out new leaves in spring and we begin again." You know, I have over here on my shelf a little sprig from a tree from Terezin, planted by Edith Lauscher, who in the middle of the Holocaust taught an art class for children. And near her window at the back of the crematorium where the kids were gathered to paint and crayon, they planted a tree. And I took a little branch from the tree because at the root of it, there's a quotation from Job. There is hope for a tree that even if it is cut down, if its roots are deep in the earth, that at the first scent of water, it will send forth new green leaves. Job 7. And so if someone in the middle of the Holocaust can embrace the paradox of evil being transformed into good, then we can too. And it can happen to us. Or perhaps the prayer and poem of Lucille Mahari might reach you. Your blessings, Lord, are greater than the sum of our burdens. Just think of that. And your blessings, God, are greater than the sum of our burdens. They calm our spirits through the darkest night, the deepest sorrow, the sweeping winds of change. Your blessings bring the light, the joy, the peace, which passes all understanding. The Buddha was once asked by a woman who had just lost her son and how to remove her pain. And he asked her to bring him one mustard seed from every person she knew who had not been touched by death.
Famous story, right?
And she could not present the Buddha with even a single mustard seed.
Right.
Loss is a universal evil, and it must be transformed into a higher wisdom, which leads to spiritual enlightenment.
All right. So, but let me ask you the technical question, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not challenging the premise. I think it's beautiful. But what does it take? At the moment of loss, I'm drowning in sorrow. I'm drowning in pain. I'm drowning in rage. My rage turns into greater rage, right? I can't imagine that Joseph at no point in this journey didn't feel some enormous sense of rage, which is why I suggested to you earlier that he never called his father, right?
Yeah.
But so how does one let go of the rage? How does one let go of the self-pity? How does one let go of the darkness that has come over your heart because of a catastrophe? Any catastrophe, much less something like we've just experienced. How do you let go of those feelings and get ready to see your history from a higher plane, to find that larger embracing narrative, which tells me, yet this might turn out well, or this might have some blessing at the end of it? How do you get out of the rage, the pain, the self-pity, the darkness, the bitterness? How do you get up to that level, Mark? And you've dealt with many families and moments of catastrophe. How do they ever do it? How do we heal?
Well, I think the one wisdom I've learned is that you try to teach them and present to them and model for them that suffering is a choice. Pain is not a choice, but suffering is a choice. So you drop something heavy on your foot, what the sensations from your foot are pain. And you can't stop that. But you can decide not to let the accident of dropping something on your foot paralyze your life. You can decide about that.
Yeah.
And the reason people are stuck in revenge and acrimony and suffering, the reason they suffer is because they can't imagine that their suffering is a choice. But the truth is, it is a choice. They can decide, you know, I'm broken in my heart. I can't, of course, get rid of that. I've lost someone I love more than life. But I can decide if that is going to ruin my life or not.
Yeah.
That's my choice. And by deciding that it will not ruin my life, that I will move on and seek the good and seek love wherever I can and try and nurture the ones who are still alive and still in my life. Once you make that choice, you are not a victim any longer. You are not a victim and you have chosen not to suffer. That difference between
But
pain
I
and
want to
suffering.
highlight something though, because it's what you said earlier. That doesn't deny that the catastrophe happened. It
No,
doesn't deny the sorrow of loss. It doesn't deny the pain, and it
no,
doesn't betray the memory of the one that you lost. You have to hold that with one hand,
yeah,
and on the other hand, make this courageous decision to say yes to life again. And that's the paradox that you started with. That's the paradox.
right. I tell people, look, the decision to suffer is like the decision if you're in the water and someone hands you a gigantic stone and you can hold on to the stone and try and tread water, but you're going to drown. Your only way to survive is to let go of that stone.
Right.
And that stone is the stone of suffering. And
So,
that really is the entire teaching of Buddhism.
mhm,
That's it. Their first noble truth is dukkha. There is suffering in the world.
yeah, a lot.
And then there are other noble truths are that there's a path away from suffering. And that path is tanhakaya. It's the release of attachment. That's where I learned this. You can release your attachment to suffering and let it go. You can let it go. That doesn't mean you're forgetting the loss. It doesn't mean you aren't broken. It doesn't mean you aren't hurting and crying. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that you've decided that that loss is not going to destroy you because that really is your only choice.
So the Jewish analog to that is after the death, we sit Shiva, but you sit Shiva for 7 days. You don't sit Shiva for 70 years. You sit Shiva
Right.
for 7 days. You have Shloshim, you have Kaddish. You but after Shiva, you stand up and go back into the world again. And it's hard to do. And it takes tremendous courage. And you got to take it slow. I think saying Kaddish is one of the interesting innovations of this community because we're going to put into your mouth words of faith, even though you don't feel it. You're going to mouth the words even though you don't believe it yet. Because by mouthing the words and by standing up from Shiva and by walking around the block and by facing the sunshine and by coming back into the world of human life, slowly, slowly, you re-enter life again. It's a very interesting, it's a powerful truth, and it's painful and it's hard to hold because it's that paradox you started with. You don't lose the reality of the catastrophe, but you also don't lose the life that you need to be living. And
Amen,
that's a
brother.
profound, so that's this week's Torah portion.
That's
The
it.
man who was sent to who sat in a pit in the desert and then sat in the prison of Egypt stands in front of his brothers and says, Afal pichein, even so, ani Yosef achicha, I still want to be one with you. Mark, thank you for learning with me this week, and thank you to everyone for listening. We wish you a very, very good Shabbos. This week, our Christian friends will be celebrating their Christmas holiday, and for those of you who do celebrate Christmas, I know there's some of you listening. We are so honored to have you learn with us, learn Torah with us, and we wish you the most blessed and joyful of Christmas holidays. And to everyone who is of our faith, Chinese food on on Sunday night is to be eaten right after sundown. That's the custom, of course, and enjoy it and enjoy a quiet week. And let's all have peace this week. God bless us, please.
Amen, amen.
See you next week, Mark. Take good care. Shabbat
Love
shalom.
you, Eddie. Bye-bye.